Hey, welcome to tutorial number 1 in Creavite tutorials. My name is Sar and today we're going to create a 3-dimensional environment in 2D. So it means we're not creating any 3D object, but we are gonna create a 3D look using some techniques. Now we're gonna use Adobe Photoshop for it. Let's get started. So this is our final result. We're going to create this building, this helicopter landing spot, the road, the sidewalk, the mailbox and everything else. Now usually we're going to start by creating a new document, but for this tutorial you're going to download the file from the description, and this document has some colors that are going to become handy later on. So let's start with the background. Now for the background we're going to go to adjustment layers and hit solid color. Then you can select this color. This is the right color for the tutorial. You can use whatever you like. We're gonna change that layer's name to background. We're going to create a new group and we're gonna rename it to 3D guides. Now what we're going to create is basically some guides that will help us to figure out the angles for our 3D environment. So we're gonna start by going to View, Show and Grid, and this will expose Photoshop's default grid, and we're going to use it to create 3D objects. So we're going to choose the line tool and we're going to set a width of 2 pixels and white color. We're gonna draw vertical lines that are evenly spaced right on top of the grid, and when we're finished we can go to View and disable extras because grid is an extra view in Photoshop. We're going to select all of the lines using Shift and Ctrl G to group them, double click on the group, and we're going to rename it to vertical lines. So we're going to duplicate this group by dragging it to the new layer button, and then double click this one and change that to horizontal lines. While this group is selected, we're going to use Ctrl T to show up transform controls. And we want to rotate these lines 60 degrees clockwise. So we can use the property viewer and change that from 0 to 60, or we can rotate the lines using Shift until the property viewer shows 60. Now by dragging this point on top using both Shift and Alt, you make the lines longer on both sides, and then hit Enter and move the lines a little lower. So next we have a third duplication to make. So drag the horizontal lines group to the new layer icon and double click on its name and change it to horizontal lines 2. We're gonna use Ctrl T again to show up transform controls. Right click, flip horizontal, and that's it, hit enter. Now move this group a little bit to the right so we have a nice floor created by our 3 groups of lines. Now to make it less confusing, we're gonna hide some parts of the vertical lines. So we'll create a mask. Choose the brush tool and make sure we're on a black color. By masking out some of the lower parts of the vertical lines group, we'll expose more of a cubic-like effect, which will be eventually our building. And you have to keep in mind that the horizontal lines are your floor and the vertical lines are your walls, and any object that is vertically standing on the floor. So after 4 minutes, the boring part is over. So we're going to start making our building, and we're going to start by choosing the rectangle tool and choose a white color, and we're going to make another group for the building, and we're going to name it, wait for it, building. And by using Shift we're going to create a proportional square, and then Ctrl T to show up the transform controls, and by dragging the side points of the transform controls using Control, we can actually change the angle of the shape according to our grid. So we're creating the first wall of the building and we're going to name it left wall, hit enter to confirm, and then we're going to create the right wall using a slightly different color so we can distinguish between the 2 walls, and we're going to make a proportional square again. Choose this color. And then Ctrl T to show up transform controls. Using the same technique, we're going to make it look right according to the grid that we made earlier in this tutorial. Take as much time as you need to make sure that it sits perfect on the lines. This will be the right wall, And to create the roof, we're going to need some more space on the top of the document. So we'll select the building and the 3D guides and move them a little bit down. And we're going to repeat the same thing we did with both of the walls, creating a square using the transform tool to make it fit the way we want it to fit. So it looks good, but we have one problem. The whole building turned out a little bit too big, and we want to scale it down. So we'll collapse the building group and select it with the guides, and then Ctrl T to show up transform controls again. And I'm going to move the anchor point to the middle of the building so that it will scale down to this point and not to just some random point on the floor. Hold both Shift and Alt on the keyboard and then scale everything down. And then hit Enter and reposition everything. And now I can place the building in a better spot. And I'm gonna tweak the vertical lines because these are cropped because we masked them out. So I want to make them sit right next to the building. Great, so let's hide the guides. And we want to start coloring things up. So we'll double click the shape color indicator and we'll choose this color. Hit enter and do the same things with the right wall and this color. Now for the roof, we'll change it first to rooftop. And before we give it a color, we want to make sure that the roof is a little bit bigger than the building itself. So Ctrl T and scale it up a bit. And now we can choose a color. So I want to move the roof to a separate group because we're going to give it a few tweaks. Make sure the roof layer is selected and use Ctrl J to make another copy of it. Now we want to move this copy up, and to make sure the first copy is still visible, we're gonna change its color. So our goal is to give the roof a little bit of depth, so it won't be flat. And the way we're going to do it is by selecting the original copy of the layer, and you're gonna hold Alt and hit the up arrow key repeatedly. So every single time you do it, Photoshop is creating another copy of the layer, and this copy is placed a little bit higher than the previous one. So now if we zoom in, we can see that we fill the edges, and it actually looks like one 3D piece. So to clean up the mess we've made, we're going to select all the copies using Shift, and then Ctrl G to group them all. And we're going to call this group Extrusion. Okay, great. So for the next part, we're going to show our grid again. And we want to reposition it so we can see the horizontal lines on top of the roof. So the next thing is the helicopter landing spot. And to create the basic of it, you're going to use the exact same techniques you used to create the walls of the building. So I'm not going to go through all of this again because we're short in time. We're going to create a new group for the landing spot. And right now we have a flat surface. And we don't want the landing spot to look flat. So we're going to duplicate it. We're going to take the original copy and change its color to something a little bit darker than the roof itself. And we're going to move it up with the arrow keys. So now we get a little more sense of what it's going to look like. But we still have the same problem we had with the roof. So if we look a little closer, you can see that we still have some empty holes in the corners, and we want to fix it. We could use the same method we used earlier to create the roof, but this is a tutorial, and I want you to know that in Photoshop you have 1,000 ways to do one thing. So we're not going to use the duplication method. So we're going to cheat a little bit right now, and we're going to take the pen tool and just create shapes. And these shapes are going to be the same color as the extrusion itself. And by creating a triangle, both here and here, we're going to cover the holes. Okay, so it looks good, but now we're facing another problem. We created 3 different shapes for something that's supposed to be one object. The thing in Photoshop is that a shape layer can contain unlimited number of shapes. So we're going to take the right triangle and we're going to go to Edit and Cut. And we're left with a shape layer that has no mask. So we're going to get rid of it. We're going to go to the original landing spot layer and we're going to click its mask and then Edit and Paste. We actually pasted the same triangle we made earlier in a different layer to this layer. And we're going to do the same thing with the second triangle. So if we're going to select our layer again, and then we're going to choose the path selection tool, we can now see that we have 3 different shapes on the same shape layer. And why this is important? Well, because this is one object, we might gonna want to change its color at some point. So now when the 3 shapes are unified into one layer, we can change the layer's color And by doing that, the entire object is going to change its color. We're going to select the 3 objects using Shift. And then we're going to hit the button on the top, says Combine. And now we have one unified layer. Now, to make it look more of a 3D object in a 3D world, we're gonna have to apply some lighting into the object. And because Photoshop is not a 3D program, we can't just add light to a scene. So we're gonna fake it. By using the rectangle tool, we're going to create a shape that covers the right side of the extrusion layer. We're gonna do the same thing we did with the triangles. We're gonna cut the layer's shape and we're gonna paste it into our extrusion shape. And now choose the path selection tool, and Photoshop gives us 4 different options to choose for changing the way a shape behaves with other shapes on the same layer. And by choosing the second one, after selecting the rectangle, we're actually hiding everything that's behind this shape that's on the same layer. And we're left only with the left side of the extrusion. So we're going to duplicate this layer, and we're going to select the rectangle again. But this time we're going to use the third option. And this option is only going to show everything that's behind this shape. We actually separated the extrusion layer into 2 different layers. And now we can select different colors for each part of it. So this is great. So we're going to make this part a little brighter than what it was. I want to move the landing spot group right below the 3D guide, just so we can see them. And inside this group, I want to take the ellipse tool and choose a white color. And I want to make an ellipse that is about the size of the landing spot itself. And using Ctrl-T, the transform controls, I'm going to change the proportions of the shape pretty much like we did with anything in this tutorial, just so it looks like it sits right on the landing spot. Using the path selection tool, we're going to select the circle. And we're going to do something a little strange. We're going to go to Edit and Copy. And right away, we're going to go to Edit and Paste. So it seems like nothing happened. But if we'll open up transform controls, again Ctrl-T, and scale it down using Shift and Alt, we're seeing that we're not scaling down the original circle, we're scaling a copy of it that's sitting on the same shape layer, so it looks like nothing happened. So then with the same tool we're going to choose the inner circle, and we're going to select the second option that Photoshop offers us to hide everything inside the main circle. For the big H, we're going to use a text layer, and we're going to use a capital H, and then using transform controls, Ctrl-T, we're gonna make it look right. Group the H and the circle and change the opacity to something around 60. Now here's a cool trick. To change a group or a layer's opacity, you don't have to select the layer and then select the opacity property and type in the value. All you need to do is to select the layer or the group and just type the value you want to change the opacity to, in our case 60, on the keyboard. The landing spot is a part of the building, so we're going to put it inside the building group. And we're going to create a new group called Window. This is the right time to bring up our guides again, and we're going to move them a little bit down. Creating the window is the exact same process as creating the landing spot. So I'm not going to go through all of it again, and we'll just fast forward this part. Now here's a nice trick. We built the scene in such a way that if you want to duplicate an object and move it or place it somewhere else on the building, we can simply do it and we don't have to worry about things like the size of an object. So you can see it looks perfect, but we'll stay with one window. So I'm gonna move the helicopter landing spot to the side of the roof, and I want to create this thing, and I don't really know how to call it, so I'm gonna call it roof thingy. So I'm gonna move the guide so it will just be a little more convenient for me to work. What's cool about boxes is when you create one side of them, you can actually duplicate this side and move it backwards. So you create another side of the box, and you can change the color of course, and again you can duplicate this side and push it backwards, and you create a nice box. I'm doing the exact same thing we did before. Now we want to close it on top, so we'll create the top shape. And let me just change the colors to something that will blend a little nicer with our environment. So I'm going to create another shape, and this shape is going to get the same proportions as the wall that's facing left. So we're going to use the guides to do it. And now by holding Ctrl, we're going to drag the top right corner of the transform controls, and we're going to bring it up, and we're going to do the opposite thing with the top left control. So we're left with this triangle, and if we'll position it just right and change its color to the same color as the left facing wall, it's gonna look like a continuous part of this entire shape. And this is exactly what we wanted. So we can now move the entire thing. And if we want, we can even flip it horizontally and it will look perfect. So let's just undo that. If we want to add some extra windows, we can do that. We're going to create a new group for it. Let me just align the guides. And these windows are going to have a slightly darker color than the wall itself. So we're going to create a shape and we'll align it properly to the wall. And we're going to use Ctrl J to duplicate this layer. We'll move it aside. And by selecting the shape and then choosing the direct selection tool, we can choose to tweak only the bottom of it. And we'll move it up. So we're making the window smaller. Now the sunroof is really easy to create. So we'll create a new group for it. And we'll create a square and again align it to the wall. And we're actually going to leave it this color, the color of the windows. And this is not going to be the sunroof itself, this is going to be the shadow of it. So let's duplicate the shadow. And we're going to call this one sunroof. And we'll change its color to this one. And with the direct selection tool, we can tweak the bottom of it. We can also make it bigger if we want to. And the direct selection tool is great because you can always make changes to shapes later on. Let's create another group for the door. We're going to control click the window to find it. And we'll duplicate it and rename it to door. And we're doing it because the door is basically the same as the window. So we can resize it if we want to. And we can change its color. So for the door extrusion, we're going to do the exact same thing we did with the window and with the landing spot. But this time we're only going to expose one side of it. So the door was kind of an easy one, but let's create the stairs. We'll create a shape and we'll make sure that it's parallel to the floor. And then we'll make another shape and make sure that it's parallel to the left wall of the building. And finally the last shape should be parallel to the right wall of the building. So as you can see, I'm changing the color of each shape to match our thingy. So we'll move all of our shapes into a group, we'll rename it to step, and we'll duplicate this group 3 times to have 3 different steps. So the stairs look great, but they are magically standing in the air. So we'll create another shape, and we'll use the same color of the left facing shapes of the steps. We'll change its proportions, and we just have to make sure that this shape is placed under all the other steps. I can proudly say that the house is finished. But don't be happy, because we still have a lot of things to do. Happy people are disgusting. Well, the building is ready, so we can collapse the group, and we can also give it a color. We'll create a new group, and we'll name it Road and Sidewalk. We can now bring up the guides and adjust their position. We'll create a new shape for the asphalt, and of course we want it to be dark gray. So we'll make a square. We'll bring up transform controls, and by holding down Control, we'll adjust the top middle point and the bottom middle point so that the asphalt matches our guides. And then to fill up the missing part, we can simply use this point to stretch our shape. So we'll move our asphalt into our group and we'll assign a new group specifically for it. And we'll call this one Road. We'll now choose the line tool and set a thickness of 5 pixels. We'll make it the same color as the background. And we'll use our guides to create one small line. And then we'll duplicate it and move it so that the space between the 2 lines will be exactly as long as the line itself. Repeat the same process until you have lines spread across the entire road. Then we'll take the line tool again and we will draw another line alongside the road. And we'll move it a few pixels to the right. We'll group all of our new shapes and we'll call this group Road Marks. Let's hide the guides and do some repositioning. We can now change the opacity of the entire group to 30%. Let's create a new group for the sidewalk. We'll create a new rectangle and we'll give it the same angle as the road itself. And we want to make it a little shorter than what the guides offer us. We'll choose a lighter color. We'll duplicate it and we'll move it to the next block while we are keeping a small space between the copies. And we'll do it alongside the entire road. We also have to make sure that the sidewalk group is placed under the road group and that the building group is placed above these two. As you can see, I also positioned the building so that the stairs will cover the sidewalk. Last but not least is the mailbox. We'll choose the rectangle tool, and for the foreground color we're gonna choose this red color, and for the background color we're gonna choose this lighter one. So we'll start by creating a rectangle that matches the angle of the right facing wall of our building. And then using the background color, we'll create another rectangle that matches the left facing wall of the building. Now here's the thing, the mailbox itself is not a cube, the top of it is actually rounded. So we're going to create a circle, we'll give it the same angle as the left facing shape and also the same color. And we want to place it so that the half of it will be at the top of the rectangle. Let's name this layer Rounded Edge. And we'll duplicate it and push it back to the other side of the mailbox. So the circles will help us build the rounded top. And this is actually what I'm talking about when I say rounded top, so you can tell why we need two circles to build it. Let's take the pen tool this time and we'll choose our darker red color and we'll create 2 points at the top of the two circles and then 2 points at the top of the front rectangle. Let's move the layer itself down and we'll change the color of the right circle to our dark red. Now as you can see it looks fine, but we still can tweak it to look a little better. You can take the direct selection tool and tweak the position of the points of any shape. Now we need to somehow insert mails into this mailbox. So we're gonna find the sunroof group and we're going to duplicate it and move the new copy into the mailbox group. We'll move this copy to our desired position, Ctrl T to bring up transform controls, and we'll scale it down using both Shift and Alt to a size that fits the mailbox. We can now select the mask of the shadow shape, and using the direct selection tool we can move the bottom of it a little down. And now we can change the color of it and give it a little more of a red color. Using the same techniques you can create this trash can. Now this one is fairly easy, so I'm not going to go over it, but if you follow the tutorial you should have absolutely no problem doing it. Using the crop tool we can now crop all the left blank area that's left in our document. If you really made it to the end of the tutorial, congratulations! You are insane. And probably sexy as well. But let's admit it, you are never too sexy to hit the subscribe button and to like this video. I'll see you next time and thank you for checking out Creavite tutorials.